Hello everyone, welcome to my channel, Armin. And I haven't been making videos since my day job caught up on me. Anyway, today's story is gonna be disturbing, as I got somewhat inspired by the American horror story The Freak Show. Remember this role? Elsa Mars, cast by Jessica Lange. The role lost her legs in the most bizarre way. And I kept wondering these abnormal human behaviors, like how could people gain pleasure by seeing other humans got tortured? Obviously, regarding abuse and being abused, there is another more normal and sexualized understanding, which is a minority trend, though ordinary in its way, the BDSM. And when I think about this sub-trend combining the role Elsa Mars, I naturally think of Germany. Sorry. Then I discovered this case. A German guy ate another guy, and both were aware and accepted the whole process. The eating and being eaten. So basically, our ancient relatives who knew how to stay alive and the thought of getting sick with diseases like the prion are probably the reasons why cannibalism grosses us out. At least for me, it does. So there's this thing called prion that can lead to Kuru, which is basically a fancy way of saying a messed up brain situation. It can cause a lot of problems, like losing control of your body, acting like a zombie, which isn't exactly fun, is it? Unfortunately, most people who get it don't live for more than a year. The weirdest part is that it's mostly found among cannibal tribes, such as in this Peru, New Guinea, who had this tradition or culture to eat their dead relatives. So you see the relation between this Kuru disease and cannibalism. But still, wouldn't curious about the human meat? Like we eat other animals' bodies, but of course, vegetarians might not be as curious as we do. It's like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, knowing it's forbidden but unable to resist the curiosity to learn more. Of course, there is a difference. My curiosity stays at the surface level, while some others' curiosity drives them to actually indulge in forbidden acts. So like doing stuff you're not supposed to do when dealing with the prion is totally not the same as what these ancient tribes did when they ate each other. They probably didn't even know it was a bad idea and thought it was just a normal part of their culture. The case we are going to talk about is this really famous guy, Armin Meiwes. I'm not sure how to pronounce his German names, so I'm gonna use the way I feel comfortable to pronounce. Sorry if I did it wrong. Anyway, this guy, he used to be a German engineer, but he committed crimes that fell exactly within the range I want to discuss. He is someone who not only understands the consequences of indulging in forbidden acts, but also actually plucked and ate the forbidden fruit. But of course, regarding cannibalism, there are many cases. It's just that the person or people who got eaten were mostly complete victims. Unlike this Bernd, Armin's partner, he was willing to be eaten. This is very different than just being curious about, how human meat tastes like kind of type. And speak of how it actually tastes like as a meat. Tokyo Illustrator, well, this guy, I don't know how to pronounce his Japanese name, sent out a tweet in 2012 after he received elective genital removal surgery. He had a surgery on his 22nd birthday, then had his genitals frozen and doubled back. So 2 months later of his surgery, he invited people for trying out his private parts. Yes, he made it like a meal. As it happened, Greg Foot from BBC did an experiment and posted on YouTube as well, trying to find out how human flesh tastes like. I will put his link to the corner. This one, doesn't matter. He removed a bit of tissue from his own leg and said it tastes like a mix of beef and chicken. At least that's what his legs taste like. Makes sense, as legs have a lot of muscles. It should taste similar to a beef, I guess. But I'm not interested to try my own meat, even for the sake of science. No thank you. And let's set aside this topic of how it actually tastes like, and begin our main story today before I gross myself out by having too much imaginations about this human flesh. Back in 2001, the internet was a lot more fun than now it is, right? A lot of countries' rules and stuff didn't quite catch up with the lightning fast growth of the internet. This meant that some websites and forums were in sort of a legal limbo, making it way easier for bad stuff to go down. So if you were to search for fetish or similar stuff, you could randomly rock into posts like this, which roughly meant looking for a well-built 18 to 25-year-old to be slaughtered and then consumed by me. And if you include your age, height, weight, and a photo in your application, it'll get bumped up to the top of the list for review. And as you can see, this was posted by Frankie. How would you react though if you were just happened to see it on one of your bored regular internet surfing day? I would think he must be joking if he ever wrote it in English. But dude posted in German. I bet German people normally don't joke like that. So when Frankie checked his inbox and discovered that he received over 200 applications, even he got surprised. And you might have guessed it, Frankie was the screen name Armin Meiwes used. He was 39 years old at the time he posted this online, not long after his mother passed away. So he inherited this huge mansion from her. Makes it easier for him to experience, or let's just say, to enjoy his long-lasting dreams. Among all these applications, about 200 claimed that they wanted to be eaten by him. 30 wanted to do the kitchen work for him, prepare the meat for him to enjoy. 10 wanted to witness the whole thing in person. Armin was quite happy to chat with them, despite he kind of knew it from deep down that these people couldn't be too serious. Well, I guess back then people chatting online were a bit more, sincere. At least by chatting with them, he was not as lonely as he was, I bet. So during this communication online, it's either Armin or his friends online. I don't know which party or which side brought it up first. But Armin ended up invited a few people come to his place, and they were trying to, play a game, or let's just say rehearsal. They normalize this whole thing and make it a entertainment even to that level. We humans are scared of what we don't know. So I guess if we started to talk about some crazy, scary stuff like it's no big deal, and using regular language to explain these unknown parts, maybe it won't be so freaky anymore. At least that's what I think. What makes sense that there were some people voluntarily to come to Armin's place and did this role-playing game with him. They wanted to test it out, experience it, the whole thing, and normalize it rather than just picture it or imagine that it was scary. There were a lot of applications. Armin only chose 4 of them to stimulate this whole scene where he pretended to kill and eat someone. They called it as rehearsal because these so-called volunteers would regret at crucial moments when Armin was about to make some actual moves. They feared the dragon they had summoned, which is fair enough. as our brains are wired to keep us from jumping off a cliff, even if we are feeling super duper down. But if one is struggling with mental health, then that would not be what we are discussing here. From this case, you can tell that Armin actually was indeed respects people's traces, by playing those games or rehearsals with them. They volunteered, so he invited them over, but they regretted it. He wouldn't force it to any of them. That's way too different from our typical murder or homicide cases, where the perpetrators never stopped when the victims said no. So I think he's more interested in having a fair relationship than using force or violence against anyone, And he's only down to play if everyone's cool about it. To be more specific, here are 2 cases we can look into. A guy, Alex, brought up to Armin saying that he wanted to be beheaded by him. But Armin turned it down as Alex was not his type. So he did have some standards, choosing his food. Another case is a guy called Stephen. Both were agreed down to the slaughter room that Armin made in his house, and Stephen was hung up by this butcher hook. The latter even had some marks drawn on the body, make it easier for Armin to open him. But both quit right after Armin drew these marks on Stephen, as it was upon deep autumn, yet to the winter time or something, too cold as the heating wasn't ready to be turned on in that very slaughter room Armin set up for himself. And I bet when Stephen left, his brain finally kicked in and stopped him from visiting Armin again in a short while. But I guess after so many volunteers, Armin must have been a little frustrated. If I were to put his lust into metaphors, I guess I'd describe it as just like a salamander that is born out of water yet managed to thrive on land. He can exist on dried ground. However, the fervent desires within him mirror his thirst for water, perhaps believing he should belong to the aquatic realm. Bernd must have been very repressed about his sexual desires. He had actually been seeing girls and even about to marry one before he couldn't bear to hide his secrets, and had to come out to stop hurting his girlfriend at the time and himself, of course. This girl stayed to be his friend to the end, so we can tell he must be a really nice person. Nonetheless, Bernd could finally started to date guys since he came out in 1997. He had, I think, only 2 boyfriends before he decided to meet up Armin in 2001. And he had always been having this fantasy about being violently eaten, particularly his genital. He even went as far to offer his ex the equivalent of 3,300 British pounds to bite off his, not sure how tolerant YouTube is to this P word. So let's just go for genital back in before the new century. As Bernd met his ex on some Berlin magazine, and this ex served as a coated Caribbean boy. Not sure what that means exactly, but I guess you think the same as me. Well, in some sources it said it's an ex, but some said it's just someone you pay to have fun with. But he was with Bernd for 2 years. They were in some sort of relationship though, not necessarily a relationship we normally have. Anyway, that gets to show you how desperately Bernd was to get mutilated. And I know that sounds a bit too extreme, even for masochism. And masochism is this really complicated thing that a lot of smart people have tried to figure out. So there's this theory about why someone are into pain. It's called the masochistic tendency theory, and it has to do with this way of our brains work. Well, our famous dude, Sigmund Freud, who was a really good shrink, came up with the idea that people might start getting into pain because of unsolved issues they had when they were kids. Basically, according to Freud, liking pain might be a way of dealing with feelings of guilt or aggression that we don't even know we have. But some other fancy psychological researchers out there think that some folks might be into pain as a way to feel they are in charge or to deal with some rough stuff that's happened to them in the past. Basically, hurting yourself a little might help you forget your problems for a bit and feel good, even though it seems weird. Masochism is a pretty difficult thing to understand, even for the smartest minds. There are lots of factors that can cause someone to be into it, and everyone's reasons are different. Psychologists are still trying to figure out all the ins and outs of masochism in the hope that we can help these people out. But with the case of Bernd, not sure what sort of treatment could steer him away from this crazy idea of answering Armin's post. I guess when they finally met, they found the right person in the most different situation. One was longing to consume and the other couldn't wait to be eaten. So in 2001, Bernd saw Armin's post despite he didn't quite fit the age requirement. It's 18 to 35, but Bernd was 42 years old at the time. And he had a boyfriend living with him in Berlin at the time as well. But he couldn't help, he just wanted to give it a go, Surprisingly, the communication between the two went smoothly. They had been chatting and emailing each other non-stop. And I bet they had a thorough discussion about what was going to happen when they meet. As Bernd actually bought new TV, new furniture, left a secret will for his boyfriend before he headed west to meet Armin. So on the evening of the 9th of March 2001, Armin took Bernd to check out this super cool room he had put together. It was a narrow little spot on the second floor, and it didn't have any windows. But let's just say it's so special as there were hooks suspended from the ceiling, and a large cage was put to the corner. There was a bed as well in the room, of course, and I'm gonna show you some real photos of it. Don't freak out. They were just looking old with some red paint splattered on the walls and floors. You think it's like that way. But if you still couldn't bear it, feel free to click away for 3 seconds. On my count. 3, 2, 1. And welcome back to me. Let's go back to Armin and Bernd. While unlike previous volunteers Armin encountered, Bernd was so different. He was not afraid of those whole settings in his slaughter room at all. In fact, he looked like he was excited about it. True passion. I bet Bernd must have his eyes lit up when he chatted with Armin. So I guess they wouldn't chat too much before they actually started to have some moments of intimacy. After that, the main course was brought to the table. Armin gave Bernd a bottle of sleeping pills, painkillers, cough meds, schnapps, liquor, basically everything he owned. Just so Bernd could relax and because he wanted to help him reduce some of the pain of what was gonna happen. And of course, Armin set up cameras before they started this cruel part of the story. The motive behind this camera thing, I guess, was for Armin to relive the moments later on, as it was proved that not many people would be consent to it, as Bernd did. Consequently, though, the police and us now reading documents, we know that both parties would consent to this whole amputation thing. From some articles that Bernd's ex said at court that Bernd had asked him to bite off his genital, so I guess it's possible that Bernd will ask Armin for the same favor. It shouldn't be an easy task. So it said that Armin had to use a knife to slice it off in the end. Well, they showed it in the video. Bernd even brought up that he wanted to try to bite his own genital in the tape. Well, it seemed to be confirmed was that he didn't eat himself though. There are several sayings about that. According to some documents, they said the police and lawyers at court were witnessing this whole tape, and they said Bernd seemed to pass out before he could even have this piece of meat in his mouth. And other sources said he had it in his mouth, but it was just too chewy, hard to bite. So Armin had to take this detached meat to fry with some spices. But neither got to taste it in the end, as Armin was not a good cook. Not sure how true that was, the cook thing. But that sounds more flavored than the court hearing version. After Bernd passed out due to blood loss, his body got completely dismembered by Armin. And it said that Armin was reading a book while waiting for Bernd to bleed. You know how people were reading books in subways, buses, or basically any transportation. Armin gave me a similar vibe, and I guess it's not easy to die out of blood loss by losing the genital only. While many ancient cultures had histories with creating eunuchs, they didn't have the most proper hygienic measures. Eunuchs still, survived. And Bernd was in a similar situation, except, of course, they didn't make much effort to stop the bleeding. But Armin didn't think this far, did he? He was just being a bit impatient to see that Bernd was just not dying after several hours. So he got to help him by stabbing him in the neck to fasten the process. Did Bernd regret this when he was waiting to die? Like we said before, we humans have this mechanism that protects us from killing ourselves. Or was he fulfilling his fetish when dying? Like climbing up a mountain, he only reached his climax the moment he actually died. Or he had both. Like he only got orgasm by breaking his self-protecting limits. Just like those who are obsessed with extreme sports such as wingsuit flying and free solo climbing. Not sure how he felt. Why didn't Armin interview him with the cameras on? Or maybe he did. As I assumed, both consent and got joy out of it. It's ethically wrong, though this mutual agreement makes it less horrified to think of. Of course, I meant if we don't picture the blood scene that they must have created. Anyway, after Bernd was dead, Armin dismembered him and stored him his different parts in the fridge. It's just like a butcher, cutting off the animals and put it aside. But I bet butchers wouldn't coat it. With every bite, my memory of him grew stronger. That's what Armin said in his memoir. He buried the inedible parts like bones and organs in his garden. It said Armin consumed about 53 pounds of Bernd. So if a grown man is chewing down on some meat, he might usually have about 4 to 8 ounces per meal. Let's take the middle and set Armin usually has 6 ounces of meat per meal. Then 53 pounds of meat could give him around 8 to 9 meals. But he wouldn't just eat meat, right? Needed some veggies as well like that. And he would finish this flesh in half a month. Armin posted another message online again when he was reaching the bottom of his storage, looking for his next victim. But this time, he didn't have the luck to run into his next soulmate, but a curious cat that reported him to the police. Apparently, Armin knew that consuming human flesh was wrong, so when the police showed up, he hesitated and tried to say what's left in his fridge was some random animal meat. But it didn't work, of course. So Armin was brought to court in December 2002. He was diagnosed with a schizoid personality, but deemed fit to stand trial. On the 30th of January 2004, Armin was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 8 years and 6 months in prison. However, the case attracted a lot of attention from the media. And for obvious reasons, people felt that his sentence was too light, so he got retrialed and sentenced to life in prison. So he got plenty of time to receive interviews by various scholars and journalists. Then they unfolded this complete story of his life from his path. He said he had this idea of consuming people since he was a child, and from listening to his childhood encounters, father abandoned the family, mommy was a control freak, other siblings went around, and he was super into this German fairy tale. The interviewers connected all and said that his strange urge was mainly due to his childhood or early life experience. Yes, I know, Freud wrote books, 3 essays on the theory of sexuality, and 3 contributions to the sexual theory. And then there's Fromm, who wrote Escape from Freedom and Psychoanalysis and Religion. Last but not least, we have Bowlby, who wrote Attachment and Loss, Volume 1, 2, 3, and some other stuff. So these psychologists are all about how what happens to you when you're a kid affects who you are and who you want to date. But not everyone agrees with them. Plus, lots of other stuff can mess with your head, besides just what you went through as a kid, right? As I think I happen to be one of those who are suspicious of a lot of things. Anyway, since we are not psychologists, we might want to leave the specific causes of this personality and sexuality aside. He grew up believing that the most romantic thing he could do was to fully have his partner, the body and flesh. Therefore, it makes sense that Armin had actually turned down a few applicants when he posted his first recruitment online. He needed to be in love with someone before consuming them. It could be him or her. I guess for him, the sex of his soul-connected partner isn't important. It's just that Bernd is a guy, but if he were a girl, it shouldn't matter. That's a very bizarre and in a way very romantic for them. I've been using a lot of iPads, I guess. That's a lot of assumptions I made in this video. But euthanasia, being with a loved one in this way can raise many ethical concerns when viewed from an outsider's perspective. Also, even though Armin said he can always feel burned inside him and is happy about it, he's already planning to put up another ad as soon as he's done eating. Does that mean Armin is eagerly looking for new romantic adventures? Their romantic relationship might be different from ours in more ways than one, right? Maybe they don't care about having a long-lasting, exclusive relationship like we usually do. After all, devouring and being devoured might be the main theme of their relationship. What do you think? Maybe I should put this clip to my Bladder Time instead. So I've got a lot of things to say about basically all of the stories I tell, but jamming all these random thoughts into the storytelling might be a bit rude to the story owners. That's why I'm gonna drop these critiques at the end of my video separate from everything else. When I started the script, I was going to discuss the issue of various human exotic food preferences. But when I read more about both Armin and Bernd, I got into thinking about relationships instead. Only because Armin is alive, we got a lot more stories from his side. But Bernd is also a very important part of this story today. There were only a few people around him who stood out and talked about him. That makes his story a bit more vague and unsure compared to Armin. And we know that both Armin and Bernd were quite financially well off, as both worked as engineers. And of course, the fact that Bernd could offer a 3,300 equivalent British pounds to have his private part bitten off backs this finance thing. Could Bernd also have some disturbing childhood memories to make him develop this strange desire to be eaten? Or was it like the girl in the movie, nymphomaniac, leveled up by having various sex experiences? And the desire got twisted somehow within the process. Or he was just like Armin, had the idea of being eaten since little. Well, in that case, that makes the two perfect for each other. And that valid if Bernd was indeed volunteered in every single moment. Like 0 second did he regret any of it. But it's a pity that he didn't have the chance to regret it if he wanted to. My brain just can't handle it anymore because my knowledge in this area is pretty limited. If you have any ideas, drop them in the comments. Let's communicate. Maybe it's time to take a break from being a relationship expert for it. And I cut off my nonsense about paraphilias in today's story. As when it reaches to the end, I feel like it's more than just foods. So the good news is that I got to end today's story here. Finally, not too long anymore. I feel like I need to cut out my unrelated bullshits a lot more often to make my videos a bit more viewers friendly. Thanks for watching. And like and subscribe if you can tolerate someone who is a bit uneducated in all the topics but still loves to talk. Bye. This whole thing just slip off on me.